The wedding bells of Millbrook had never rung so strangely before. They chimed not in celebration, but in bewilderment, as the townspeople gathered to witness the most peculiar union their small frontier town had ever seen. Thomas Hartwell stood barely chest-high to his bride, yet his smile stretched wider than the prairie horizon. His bride, Evangeline, towered above the wooden church steps like a gentle mountain, her ivory wedding dress flowing around her like clouds around a peak. The townspeople whispered behind gloved hands and shook their heads in disbelief. "Poor Thomas," they murmured. What could he possibly see in such an unusual woman? But Thomas saw everything they couldn't. He saw the way Evangeline's enormous brown eyes sparkled when she laughed. He saw how gently she tended to wounded birds with fingers that could crush stones. He saw the loneliness that matched his own, hidden behind her towering frame. The story of their meeting had become legend in Millbrook, though not the kind that inspired songs. Thomas had been traveling through the deep woods beyond town, collecting herbs for his apothecary shop, when he'd stumbled upon a clearing where impossibly large footprints marked the earth. There, sitting by a stream with tears the size of dewdrops rolling down her cheeks, sat Evangeline. She was nearly 20 feet tall, with hair like spun gold that cascaded down her back in waves. Her dress, sewn from what looked like several bedsheets, was simple but clean. When she noticed Thomas, she tried to hide behind a tree that was still too small to conceal her properly. "Please don't run," she'd whispered, her voice like distant thunder. "I'm so very tired of people running." Thomas had done the opposite. He'd sat down on a fallen log and unpacked his lunch, offering half to the giantess as naturally as if she were any other traveler. They'd talked until sunset about books and flowers, about the loneliness of being different, and about dreams that seemed too big for small towns. Their courtship lasted through autumn and winter, with Thomas visiting Evangeline's hidden grove every day after closing his shop. She'd built herself a shelter from fallen trees and canvas, living off wild fruits and vegetables she grew in a garden that looked like a child's toy farm from her perspective. The townspeople thought Thomas had lost his mind when he announced their engagement. Mayor Fletcher had even organized a town meeting to discuss the Thomas situation, as they called it. "It's unnatural," declared Mrs. Pemberton, the town's self-appointed moral authority. What kind of children would they have? What kind of life could they possibly build together? "Thomas has always been eccentric," added Dr. Morrison, adjusting his spectacles. "But this goes beyond eccentricity. It's pure madness." Yet Thomas persisted, and eventually, Father McKinnon agreed to perform the ceremony. "Love is love," the old priest had said, "and I've seen stranger things blessed by God." The wedding day arrived with all the fanfare of a curiosity show. Half the town came to gawk, the other half stayed away in protest. Evangeline had to kneel during the entire ceremony so that Thomas could reach her hands for the ring exchange. Her wedding dress, sewn by 3 seamstresses working around the clock, used enough fabric to make dresses for a dozen ordinary brides. When Father McKinnon pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas had to climb a stepladder to kiss his bride. The crowd erupted in nervous laughter, some applauding politely, others shaking their heads in dismay. "You may now carry the bride," joked someone from the back, causing another ripple of uncomfortable laughter. But it was Evangeline who lifted Thomas, cradling him gently in her massive arms as she walked down the aisle. Her smile was radiant, her happiness unmistakable, yet the whispers followed them like shadows. "Give it a month," predicted the blacksmith. "Reality will set in soon enough." But months passed, and Thomas and Evangeline settled into married life with surprising ease. Thomas moved his apothecary to a larger building on the outskirts of town, where Evangeline could visit without causing too much commotion. She proved remarkably helpful in gathering high branches for rare herbs and reaching places no ordinary person could access. Still, the townspeople remained skeptical. Children would sneak to the edge of Thomas's property just to catch a glimpse of the giant lady, running away in delighted terror when she waved at them. Adults crossed themselves when her shadow fell across their path. The general store owner refused to sell Thomas the massive quantities of fabric and food his household now required. "It's not right," people continued to mutter. "A marriage should be between equals." Thomas heard every whisper, felt every stare. Sometimes, late at night, he wondered if they were right. Could love really conquer such vast differences? Was he being selfish, keeping Evangeline tied to a world that would never accept her? But then Evangeline would hum while tending her enormous garden, her voice creating melodies that seemed to make the flowers grow taller. Or she'd gently catch a falling bird in her cupped palms, healing its broken wing with the kind of patience that only comes from understanding pain. In those moments, Thomas knew that their love was not just real, it was necessary. The test of their marriage came on a Tuesday morning in late spring, when the earth began to shake. Thomas was in his shop, grinding herbs, when the first tremor rattled the bottles on his shelves. Outside, people stumbled into the street, looking around in confusion and fear. Millbrook had never experienced an earthquake, and nobody knew what to do. The second tremor was stronger, cracking windows and sending chickens squawking into the air. The third tremor brought screams from the direction of the church. Thomas ran toward the sound, his heart pounding, only to discover a sight that would haunt him forever. The church, the same church where he'd married Evangeline, was tilting dangerously to one side. Its foundation had cracked, and the entire structure was slowly collapsing. But the collapse had been interrupted, frozen in time by something impossible. Evangeline knelt beside the church, her massive shoulders pressed against its wall, holding the entire building steady with her own strength. Her face was strained with effort, beads of perspiration the size of raindrops rolling down her cheeks. But she held firm. "The children," she gasped when she saw Thomas. "The children are inside." Thomas's blood went cold. Tuesday morning was when Mrs. Henderson taught Sunday school lessons to the youngest children in town. They must have been trapped when the building started to collapse. The townspeople gathered in a circle around the scene, but nobody moved. They stood frozen in shock, watching the giantess they'd mocked and feared holding their most precious building and their most precious lives in her gentle hands. "We need to get them out," Thomas shouted, snapping the crowd from their paralysis. Mayor Fletcher stepped forward, his face pale. "The main door is blocked by debris. The windows are too high for the children to reach." That's when Evangeline spoke, her voice steady despite her obvious strain. "I can lift the building higher, just a little, but you'll need to be quick." Without waiting for permission, she adjusted her grip and slowly, carefully, raised the church wall another few feet. The effort caused her to tremble, but she held strong. The motion created just enough space for the adults to squeeze through a side window that had previously been out of reach. Thomas was the first through the window, followed by Dr. Morrison and several other men. Inside, they found 7 terrified children huddled together, unharmed but frightened. Mrs. Henderson was comforting them, her own face white with fear. One by one, the children were passed through the window to safety. Little Sarah Martinez was crying for her mother. Young Billy Fletcher, the mayor's grandson, clung to Thomas's coat. Each rescue felt like a lifetime, but Evangeline held steady, her massive frame trembling with the effort but never wavering. Finally, Mrs. Henderson was helped through the window, and Thomas followed last. The moment everyone was clear, Evangeline carefully, slowly, lowered the church until it settled against the ground. The building was damaged but intact, its collapse prevented by her incredible strength. She remained kneeling there for a long moment, breathing heavily, before finally standing to her full height. The crowd had grown to include nearly the entire town, all of them staring up at her in wonder. For the first time since Thomas had known her, Evangeline addressed the townspeople directly. "I know you think I'm strange," she said, her voice carrying easily across the square. "I know you think Thomas made a mistake marrying me, but this is my home now too. These are my neighbors, my community. When you needed help, I was proud to give it." The silence that followed was profound. Mayor Fletcher was the first to step forward, his grandson Billy still clinging to his hand. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, his voice thick with emotion, we owe you our deepest gratitude, and our deepest apologies." One by one, the townspeople approached Evangeline. Some thanked her through tears, others simply nodded respectfully. Mrs. Pemberton, the town's harshest critic of the marriage, was among them. "I was wrong," she said simply, looking up at Evangeline with new eyes. "I was wrong about everything." Double quotes. Dr. Morrison, who had once called the marriage madness, removed his hat and bowed deeply. "Mrs. Hartwell, it would be an honor if you would allow me to call you neighbor." As the crowd dispersed and life slowly returned to normal, Thomas took his wife's enormous hand in both of his smaller ones. The contrast that had once seemed so impossible now felt perfect to people who fit together not because they were the same, but because their differences created something beautiful and strong. That evening, as they sat together in their garden watching the sunset, Evangeline leaned down to kiss her husband's forehead. "Do you think they'll accept us now?" she asked. Thomas smiled, thinking of the children's laughter as they'd been rescued, of the mayor's respectful bow, of the way the townspeople had looked at his wife not with fear but with awe. "I think," he said, "they're beginning to understand what I've known all along. Love isn't about being the same size on the outside. It's about being the same size on the inside, where it matters." From that day forward, Millbrook became a different kind of town. Children no longer ran away when they saw Evangeline, they ran toward her, knowing she would always protect them. The general store owner began special ordering supplies for the Hartwell household, and every Sunday, when the repaired church bells rang, they seemed to chime a little sweeter, as if grateful to still be singing at all. The townspeople learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes in the gentlest packages, and that true love can indeed move mountains, or, in their case, hold up churches and hold together communities. Thomas and Evangeline lived happily in Millbrook for many years, their marriage becoming not a cautionary tale, but an inspiration. And whenever anyone questioned whether two people so different could possibly make a life together, the townspeople would simply point to the church that still stood strong, saved by the loving hands of a giantess who had chosen to make their small town her home.